and good to have you with us in the 9 p.m. edition of the Urban Debate. Because, as you know, recently, journalist and rape accused Tarun Tejpal was acquitted of the rape and sexual assault charges. It was by a trial court in Goa, which has already been now challenged by the state. There was a hearing that took place in the Bombay High Court today. I'm going to tell you all about what happened in the hearing. I'm going to also read out some very interesting or astonishing, as the Solicitor General says, parts of the order which has now been challenged. And I will also once again talk about an issue that was raised by the Supreme Court a few months ago. We even debated it then. About when it comes to cases of crimes against sexual crimes, cases of sexual assault and rape, the kind of sensitivity that the judges need to show, and what needs to be the focus when the verdict is given, what has to be factored in, how it can't be about the woman's behavior. We'll talk about all of that. Let me first tell you this, that I don't know whether this alleged crime took place or not. I don't know if Tarun Tejpal is guilty or not. And none of us, neither me nor any of my panelists who join me here tonight, are going to be passing a judgment on that. It isn't for us to decide. But we are going to look at very key aspects of the investigation, of the evidence submitted in the court, and the court's findings, many of which will now be challenged and questioned. Let me tell you what the state's objections were and were mentioned in the Bombay High Court today. Objections to the comments on the non-rape victim-like behavior. And these objections are, comments are actually made for pages and pages together about how the complainant in this case did not behave like a victim of rape or sexual assault, did not look traumatized enough. The state has already also objected to the comments on the faulty probe in order to grant Tejpal benefit of doubt. So yes, there is a part in the order which says that the prosecution didn't present good enough evidence. Some amount of evidence was in fact destroyed, which is what made the case weaker. The state also objected to manner in which the court interpreted victims' action in seeking legal advice. The fact that the complainant sought advice from legal experts and even Women Commission members and senior activists has been taken as a bit of a problem. That action seems to have been judged here. And that is what the objection is. There is also the big problem that emerged today itself, which is why a full copy of the order is not publicly available right now, that the order and the lectures there ended up in a way revealing the identity of the rape complainant, which isn't allowed, by revealing her family members' names, her email ID, and what not. The Bombay High Court has now asked for all of this to be redacted before the order is again uploaded on a public platform. Now, let me tell you where the prosecution has failed according to the order itself. And I will tell you, more importantly, where the commentary has become the focus. The commentary by the judge in this order, that the complainant or the prosecutress did not demonstrate a rape victim-like behavior. That the pictures, photos taken at that time show her to be absolutely cheerful. That the prosecutrix has a smile on her face and does not seem disturbed. That she doesn't seem reserved, terrified or traumatized, even when she was coming out of the lift where the alleged assaults took place. In the CCTV footage, it doesn't look like she was traumatized or she was crying. that the prosecutrix account does not show any kind of normative behavior. That the norm for this complainant is to have flirtatious and sexual conversations with friends and acquaintances. This has been observed and commented in the order. That the conduct and the attitude of the mother of the complainant speaks volumes about the state of trauma. Basically, the conduct didn't seem like that of a mother of a daughter who had been raped, and that has been judged. That the mother did not change any plans to offer the most natural support to a traumatized daughter. Now, perhaps in absence of credible evidence, this is what the court deemed fit to speak about in an effort to say that if your only key evidence is the complainant's statement, these are the reasons why we don't believe that this statement and her statement can be taken as the gospel truth. Let's talk about this. Let's say good evening to Pinky Anand, Senior Advocate of the Supreme Court and former ASG, Sanjay Hegde, Senior Advocate with the Supreme Court, Mr. Neeraj Kumar, former Commissioner of the Delhi Police, Trisha Shetty, Advocate and founder for She Says NGO, joining me right now. Pinky Anand, good evening to you. Let me start off with you. In cases and complaints of rape and sexual assault, especially when the accused is somebody in a position of power and authority, to what extent is the complainant's attitude and behavior as a response to the crime important?
Tanvi, I like the way you framed the question, but it's something that we've been agonizing over and being bothered over not today. I'm talking about a time when you didn't have the provision which was making a person in position and power and trust more actionable than a regular case of rape, so to say, whatever is worth saying. And that made it more actionable and a higher punishment being accorded to a person because he had that dominant position of trust and control over the person. Therefore, the person obviously would be scared and coerced into doing so. So the question of what is the kind of proof, the law says it is to be presumed, the presumption is in favor of the complainant. When she says it is without consent, then it is to be deemed to be without consent. So if you ask me, all these changes came about because of the typical position that happened because everybody typically said it was consensual. Everybody typically said that the position was not abused. And this came into place because of gruesome, bizarre situations. But nonetheless, I mean, today we are confronted with a judgment. As you rightly said, then we are like your statement, which says we are not concerned with what happens to the case or the accused in that sense. What we are concerned with is the observations and the findings of the court, which addresses itself to the same questions that the Supreme Court in Justice Bhatt's and Justice Kanvilkar's judgment categorically said, don't pay attention to past conduct. Don't pay attention to any of the details regarding her clothing, her dressing, or any other part of her life. And today, the very same issues, the mother's conduct, how should she have behaved? How should a natural mother behave? Is the court God? I mean, you should know what is natural, what is not natural. Where are we going with this conversation? The entire situation comes around from a complaint made. And as I said, I'm not going into the merits. But the point is, you talk about a chiffon dress, you talk about the length of a dress, you talk about her consulting senior lawyers like Indra Jaising and other lawyers in the National Commission. Isn't it our birthright to go to lawyers when we have an issue? Isn't the complainant supposed to do so? What is the complainant supposed to do? So here you have this thing, ideal Nari, Adarsh Nari, and how the Nari is supposed to behave and why she's supposed not to smile, she's supposed to go crying somewhere. And that is what we even landed up with. We can't possibly, this 527-page judgment, I'm afraid, is a complete rhetoric on patriarchal behavior, which has come forth from the court concerned. And it's something that needs to be rectified not only by any reversal, but in turn also by the findings of the court, which enter into areas that are prohibited. So I wonder whether we should actually not approach this, the Honorable Supreme Court again to say, irrespective of one, on the basic reversal of the judgment from acquittal into conviction, we are talking about what can a court go into? Is the court open to go into each and every question? Yes or no?
A lot of this, a large part of the order, pages and pages and pages, in fact, dwell into how the complainant is not able to remember a lot of details. A lot of the details of what happened, the sequence of events, the exact timing, the distance between a certain location in the hotel from the and another location, the number of times she went in and out, and from here right up to the point of how she didn't remember her interactions with biggest of the stars, and many of them have been named that she interacted with as a journalist. She didn't remember the details of her interaction with the activists and when and who she spoke to, or even lawyers, and what she sought, what her first draft of a letter or a complaint was, and whether it was different from the second draft. Pages and pages of exhaustive detailing Mr. Sanjay Hegde done to show that she is not a reliable witness. Now, there is much being said even about that, whether her conduct was a rape victim like or not, and whether she is reliable because she can remember a few things or not, because she didn't look traumatized but she claims she was traumatized. Is all of this really being done in the order because there isn't much other evidence to speak of?
Well, it all depends, right? You may not like what I say, but essentially, what was the case? The case was, can you hear me? Can you hear me, Tanvi?
Yes, I can. Go ahead, please.
Okay. So so essentially the case was that in the lift, there was what is called digital rape. The lift sequence is a couple of minutes. And there is CCTV footage of the time that the persons leave the lift, right? The entire case boils down to the credibility of the prosecutrix. Now, you may say that this shouldn't have been written, that shouldn't have been written, etc. But what is the judge to do? Mind you, the judge is also a lady. What is the judge to do? The judge is being called upon to sentence somebody to 10 years or more of imprisonment. The normal law is proof beyond all reasonable doubt. It is not for the defendant to disprove the case. It is for the prosecution to establish case beyond all reasonable doubt. And you must recollect that when there is an allegation of a finger going in at the wrong spot, there is very little medical evidence. There's nothing else to corroborate. It is only, do you believe what she says? Do you bring it to a level of moral certainty to say, yes, beyond all reasonable doubt, the case has been proved? So the lady judge has incorporated whole sheets of the testimony of the prosecutrix. She has put the circumstances together and on the balance of probability said that it is not established beyond reasonable doubt and therefore I acquit. She says that, look, the prosecution had this burden. The prosecution has not discharged the burden. The investigation was faulty. Crucial pieces of the evidence were not there. Now, if you, on the other hand, think that, you must disregard the burden of proof, you don't need to prove beyond all reasonable doubt. And yes, all men are like that. And yes, therefore, once there is an allegation like that, all that the man can do is to plead guilty. Yes. All that the Tejpal group, the Tejpal defense has been.
I think we've made it very clear. We are not even saying that this is not a men versus women debate at all. Yes. No, and neither are we saying Tarun Tejpal is guilty.
The way you framed your opening, though Pinky liked it, I disliked it. I intensely disliked it. Boy, once a person has... No, just a minute. Please don't interrupt me. Once a person has the benefit of an acquittal, unless that acquittal has been set aside by a superior court of competent jurisdiction, he is entitled to a clean slate. Yes, you are factually correct when you say that there was an allegation of rape. But you have to, given the scheme of the rule of law, if there is a court judgment, the gentleman, no matter how heinous you consider him, has to be given the benefit of the acquittal. And yes, there is something called proof beyond
Okay.
reasonable doubt, which is the same standard for men and women. And in this
Which
case,
is fine. So,
and in this
Tanvi,
case,
Yes.
a lady
I'm
judge.
sorry, I have something to add here.
which is fine. Which all of this, I think, yes, just 30 seconds, Pinky Anand. Which is fine,
Yes, sure.
Mr. Sanjay Hegde. Benefit of doubt must be given to all accused, men or women. Okay, I get the point that you're making. Here is what the court order also says on the lapses of the investigation. That the investigation officer did not question prosecutress on key issues. Investigation officer deliberately delayed seizure of evidence. Investigation officer committed omissions and commissions. No investigation was done on crucial and vital aspects of the case. Possibility of the tampered evidence cannot be ruled out. That yes, there were emails and letters and footage which is mentioned, spoken about, but never submitted. Now, rather than, here is the question back to Pinky Anand. Rather than speaking about this and
Just
speaking
one
about
line. I want
how
one
the
line.
prosecution didn't present a good enough case and didn't present the good evidence, was it necessary to go into whether the victim looked traumatized enough to be qualified as a rape victim or not? That's what I'm asking here. Pinky
Tanvi,
Anand.
you're right. Tanvi, you're right. And in addition to, I'll come to that in a second about the this ideal rape victim story. But coming back to the real question, and I think Sanjay has gone totally the reverse way. You have a law in the country which stood the scrutiny of law, that there is a presumption of rape when the prosecutrix pleads so. And I think 114A of the Evidence Act is something he should possibly look at, because you're not talking about a typical case. The burden of proof has been shifted. And it is, once a prosecution claims it to be so, then it is for the defense to disprove it. One. Secondly, aside from that, all these observations, if you look at the judgment, Tanvi, it actually reflects, take a point of the prosecution and rip it apart. And that is unfortunately the trend in which the entire case appears to have gone. You know, if you just put it aside for a moment, all these detailed examination of the evidence, what do you find? You find a critique on the prosecutrix's behavior, how she behaved before, after. You find a critique on her earlier sexual liaisons. You find a critique on her behavior. You find contradictions in each of her testimony. You do everything that the Supreme Court says. You find her chiffon dress, you go into the length of the chiffon dress, you go into whether she pulled or picked up the panty in about 10 paragraphs, which I can't understand what the difference really lies in. So today, as you rightly said, what we are talking about is, can you victimize a victim? Can you victimize a survivor by these kind of judgments, which seem to have overstepped all possible jurisdictions? And I would say, aside from this acquittal into conviction, whatever the court may deem fit, when it considers the matter, these kind of observations have to be struck down. You cannot permit a system of rule of law where you violate each and every canon of morality, of ethicality and proportionality in dealing with the situation. And for a moment, if you come to the merits, you have the prosecutor's statement, you have witnesses' statement, you have Tarun Tejpal's, you call it, the court calls it confession and therefore overrules it and says it's not worth it because it is under duress or coercion or whatever it may be. But a statement by Tarun Tejpal saying he's sorry and apologizing, he's apologized for something. Whatever that content is, you cannot disregard it. If you call it extrajudicial, call it a statement made. He doesn't deny the statement. He was in a position of power. All the colleagues of the complainant and prosecutrix have supported her. And I don't want to say it, but they do say she was distressed and crying when she talked. Last thing, Tanvi. A rape victim or a sexual assault victim is always placed very precariously. They don't behave like normal people would do in a normal criminal kind of situation. There is this complete societal thing which comes into play. There is this patriarchal thing. There is a position of dominance that you have of the employer. So once the situation happens, if typically what the court possibly suggests is that she should have come out of the lift and gone running to the police station, not consulted the National Commission for Women, not consulted Indra Jaising, not gone out and talked to anybody, then it would have been rape. But because she's done so, therefore it's not rape. This is what I'm leaving the matter at.
Can I put it? Can I come in?
Okay, so two more panels that I must go to.
Yeah, just quickly.
Okay,
A court
if I can just very quickly, Mr. Hegde, yes.
All that I'm saying is that a court which sentences somebody is entitled to weigh the evidence. If in the mind of the court there is reasonable doubt, the person is entitled to an acquittal. And if a court is entitled to set out its reasons why it has had the doubt. That's all.
Okay. One of the reasons that the court doesn't believe when the complainant says that I was too scared initially, I didn't know what to do, I was concerned about my job, I was concerned about what it would do to my family, and I was in a state of shock and trauma. One of the reasons the court also doesn't believe that is because the victim earlier had once complained against a Delhi cop of molesting her and her friend. And so if she could complain against the Delhi cop, Mr. Neeraj Kumar, but there is no reason to believe that she was actually scared this time to complain against her super boss of sexually assaulting her. Now, the question we're asking is, rather than focusing on what was missing or a poor prosecution case presented, did the entire focus just go towards how the complainant behaved and whether that could be taken as a cause to decide guilty or not guilty?
I think that point is already in discussion between two eminent lawyers, and I would not like to intervene in that. Basic points is a number of things said in the judgment. I'm sorry, there is several echo.
Yes, I'm going to get that fixed. Even when we're listening to you, there seems to be a problem. Mr. Neeraj Kumar, give us 30 seconds to try and fix that. Trisha Shetty, come in here on the conversation that we're having right now. The victim's playful and flirtatious conversations regarding sex and desire, her behavior with her other colleagues and friends, the fact that she was brazen to hide the extent of her relationship with another person who was present there and didn't say that she spoke to him first about the problem initially. These are the reasons that have been presented to say she's not a reliable witness. The question is that the right way to go, or does it go against what the Supreme Court just said 2 months ago?
You know, firstly, I'm grateful for voices like Senior Advocate Pinky Anand for making a case for why this is just an unjust verdict. You know, just like Senior Advocate Mr. Sanjay Anand said that she was a female judge. That does not lay any merit as to the judgment being a just judgment or not. I go back to what Suzette Jordan said when she said, "Don't call me Park Street rape survivor, call me by my name." She actually said, and I quote, "Just because I have been raped, people feel I have no right to live, and certainly that I have no right to be happy. I feel as if I'm being blamed for being alive. Why shouldn't I enjoy life?" Right? So these are these patriarchal notions that are put on women, this obsession as to what did a survivor do just before being assaulted that may have warranted her being assaulted. What did she do right after being assaulted? This obsession with us wanting someone to be the perfect victim. In this case, the judge says that the prosecutress failed to prove herself as a sterling witness. Why? Because, and I quote, that there are photographs that show she was in a good mood, happy, normal, and smiling. That this woman the survivor is a woman who's aware of laws, intelligent, alert, and physically fit, does yoga, and could not push off the accused. That she held her jaw firmly closed. How was it possible for Tejpal to shove his tongue into her mouth? I mean, I have never heard of this kind of questioning ever being deemed as acceptable. This kind of interrogation is never acceptable, let alone in courtrooms where someone goes to ask justice. This is what we have been calling for the longest time: victim blaming and shaming. If the survivor is not a sterling witness, please tell me, how is Mr. Tejpal a sterling ideal person who's deemed of being, who's worthy of being acquitted? When you read his letter of admission of guilt, which they say he did not write, but he did put his name to, that says he looked at this girl as a young woman who has grown up in front of him. That in itself is a clear position of difference in power and authority, establishes that he was in a position of trust and authority. Also, let's not forget that his entire coterie of rape apologists went around saying they saw the tape, the elevator tape, and that is why Tejpal is innocent. Where has the action been taken against that elevator tape being leaked to his entire private circle of friendly journalists, of friendly people in echelons of power who claimed that he could not have raped her because they were privy to this tape, which is in clear violation of the survivor's privacy. From day one, this survivor has not been afforded any access of dignity. Her identity has been disclosed. His entire coterie has kept saying we saw the tape and hence she is lying. There's been no action taken against even one person who has claimed that they were privy and saw the tape. Why has action not been taken against them? And till date, you continue to malign her good name. You continue to put out her identity and call it lapses, and then say that this is a fair judgment because she's a female judge. I'm sorry, but this is not a fair judgment. This sets the women's movement back. These are the kind of judgments that tell women do not complain, especially when a person is in a position of power and authority. And again, we're not even talking about how an ICC was not established. How, because Tarun Tejpal was the CEO, the case should have gone directly to an LCC and not the ICC. And how Tehelka should have taken onus of it. We are not even talking about how there were so many lapses from the day the survivor reached out and asked for help. Instead, through this entire judgment, we have obsessed over what the survivor was wearing, whether her jaw was open or closed, how she looked in pictures after the abuse, and how she was not an sterling witness, when instead we should be subjecting Mr. Tejpal, a rape accused, of such scrutiny. And in our enthusiasm to defend a rape accused who has now been acquitted, albeit, but the judgment is, being questioned, we have forgotten to give basic amount of decency, dignity, and respect towards the survivor and how we talk about such cases at large. And let's not make any mistakes, that this goes to show to all other survivors of sexual abuse that keep your mouth shut, do not complain, because the system works against you, and men in power and position will violate your right to privacy, will violate your dignity, and continue to do so because you don't fit into this absurd, definition of what a perfect victim is supposed to look like, without putting Tejpal to the same scrutiny, if not worse.
Yeah. Well, she also says, if the prosecutrix, the complainant, had held her jaw firmly closed, how would it be possible for the accused to put his tongue into her mouth? Not possible to believe that a physically fit woman who does yoga, which is mentioned multiple times in the order, not possible to believe that a physically fit woman would not push off the accused. The prosecutress has stated that she pushed the accused as hard as she could, and she did so instinctively and reflexively whenever she pushed him. But why didn't she push the accused before he kissed her, when she was pushed against the wall, or at least put her hands in between to prevent the accused from coming close? Her explanation that she did not imagine that the accused would try to do such a thing is not at all believable. Mr. Sanjay Hegde, to the point that you made and Trisha raised, do you want to respond to that? How does it matter whether the judge was a man or a woman? In fact, if we've just seen in the recent past several other orders which have been problematic, acknowledged by the Supreme Court, which are also given by a judge lady from Nagpur. You're on mute, Mr. Hegde, can't hear you.
Okay. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. See, I said that it was a lady who assessed the evidence and gave the judgment. A man may not have presumed to know so much about how a woman is supposed to behave in those circumstances. That's all
Supposed
that
to
I
be.
meant. Now the second point is that as far as Ms. Shetty is concerned, she's said a lot about what society should be like, and in which I find myself entirely in agreement. But when you come to a criminal court, you do not move from the proposition that the prosecution carries the burden of proof. The case has to be proved beyond all reasonable doubt, and without such a finding, you cannot send somebody away for 10 years or more. It is as simple as that. While you assess the evidence, ultimately it comes down to only the victim's statement. Now, Pinky Anand invoked 114A of the Evidence Act. 114A is with regard to the question of consent. There was no defense taken here that that it was consensual. The defense taken here was it did not happen. In that lift, on that day, at that particular point of time, nothing happened. We used a lift, we went our respective ways. That is what the defense is. The prosecution says that in that lift, on that day, the man inserted a finger inside. Now, how you have two versions. How do you decide that the prosecution version has been proven beyond all reasonable doubt? That is where you look at the entire concatenation of circumstances and say, something quite doesn't add up. I do not feel safe enough to convict this man. Therefore, I acquit. You may have taken 527 pages to have said it. You may have gone into some flights of fantasy at some portions, but at the end of the day, this is all that the incident is. This is all that the allegation
Mr. Hegde. Exactly. Did you? Yes, that's the point. So again, again, and I will emphasize on this. It's about those, about 350 of those pages, which totally only dwell on the woman and her actions and her seeking legal advice and expert advice and friends' advice. And people she's interacted with, stories and coverage that she may have done as a journalist that she remembers or doesn't remember, her understanding of laws, rape laws, extent of that understanding and all of that. What you're saying, that's the whole case. And Mr. Neeraj Kumar, since you're back with us, the case here, and ideally the conversation we could be having here or should be having here if it wasn't for all the other commentary, was on how the court has actually said that the prosecution has omitted and removed a lot of things and destroyed, possibly tampered or destroyed evidence. That's a big concern for me as well.
Well, if the prosecution or if the investigating officer has not done his job properly, whether for ulterior motives or otherwise, nobody is going to defend that act of omission. If the CCTV footage has not been preserved, if witnesses' statements have not been taken, no police officer worth his salt is going to defend these inadequacies on the part of the investigating officer. And if the prosecution has failed on certain issues, well, too bad. The case has been lost, maybe because of that. But at the same time, one of the things that has not been discussed when the lawyers were debating the matter was, why did the judge have to reveal the identity of the victim? That is most reprehensible. And if honorable judges commit such mistakes, to expect the police to, observe these little, niceties, or shall we say, these points would be very difficult. It would be a tall order. So I'm most upset about the revealing of the identity of the victim by the court, which should not have been done.
Yeah. Yeah. You're absolutely right there. Let's also say good evening to Mr. Vikas Singh joining us right now. Mr. Vikas Singh, here is what the Supreme Court said on do's and don'ts for judges a couple of months ago. And many of us were on that panel having a similar conversation that time, a different case. But the Supreme Court said you need to show greatest sensitivity in approach, language, and reasoning in such cases. Even a solitary instance of orders without sensitivity reflects adversely on the judicial system. Some of the orders have undermined the guarantee of fair justice to all, especially to victims of sexual violence. Discussion about dress, behavior, or past conduct of the prosecutress should not matter. Courts should not suggest or entertain any notion towards compromises, and sensitivity should be displayed at all times by judges. My question to you is this court order an example where these do's and don'ts perhaps haven't been looked into?
Well, Tanvi, I must tell you one thing, that if this discussion had happened prior to the judgment, she would still be a victim. But after the judgment, you can't still term her to be a victim, because now there is an acquittal happened. So it is not a case of any victim remaining anymore. Number two, when you have a criminal case of this kind, where a person may have to be sentenced for 10 years or maybe even life for a offense, and if there are no eyewitnesses, please appreciate, Tanvi, there are no eyewitnesses. If there are no eyewitnesses, then every action of the prosecutrix or of the accused all have extreme relevance. So when a judge has no eyewitness and the judge has to go by circumstantial evidence, then the conduct of the parties post and pre definitely are relevant for the judge to take into consideration. Now, what has happened in this case? She alleged that he, did something to her in the lift, and when the lift opened, she ran out of the lift and he ran after her. But when you see the video of the hotel, which is showing them coming out of the lift, Tarun Tejpal comes first and she's running after him and holding his hand. So, I mean, if these things don't add up, and that is why the judge has to take adverse inference on this, because ultimately, what she claims to have happened inside a closed room, a lift is like a closed room because there were only two people there, is to be judged on the basis of what happened immediately before or after when the lift opens. So these factors and her conduct thereafter, an hour after or 2 hours after later that. Now, just appreciate one more thing. You're talking about Supreme Court judges being, laying all these laws. If you will recall recently when Justice Bobde was the Chief Justice of India, and there was a rape case which came before him, and he had casually mentioned in court that are you ready to marry him? And the press made a huge, this thing that how can a judge be so insensitive and ask a accused of marrying a rape victim? Justice Bobde talked to me and he said that it is completely misreported because they were in a relationship, they were about to get married, and when he decided to not marry her, that she put that rape allegation against him. So he said, are you ready to marry? So it's actually a case in the converse. So sensitivity sometimes has to be of media as well. The media also, before putting the judge in the dock, should also realize that what are the background circumstances in which he talks of marriage. In every case, a reference to marriage or wanting to marry or the judge wanting them to get together and get married may not be against the concept of sensitivity. So if somebody is in a live-in relationship and they were about to marry, and when the guy says, I don't want to marry, and she puts the rape case, probably it's not a case of a rape case of having the same kind of sensitivity where there is a complete forceful invasion of somebody's
but
rights.
Is it up to the courts?
I personally,
to get them, but is it up to the courts to offer them solutions about marriage or walking away or ending the relationship? The courts shouldn't they just be deciding on whether it was rape or not?
Tanvi, that will all depend on the facts of each case. In a case where a consensual relationship is later on termed to be rape because the marriage doesn't take place, it's not a case of a rape simpliciter. So the sensitivity in every case will be different. Here, the sensitivity is that a girl is alleging a rape happening inside a closed room. So the sensitivity will have to be given out of the window, and the lady will have to be seen in very close, because you just appreciate, if it is a false allegation inside a lift, which appears to be now because of the acquittal, then can the sensitivity of a girl still be maintained, even if she's wanting to falsely implicate somebody? I mean, is this the jurisprudence that we want in this country? So it's not a uniform rule. I can understand a sensitivity in a genuine rape case or a rape victim,
Okay.
where the judge may go in these kind of issues. But this is not one of those cases where that sensitivity was there, and that is why the judge was forced to look into her post and past conduct, pre and post conduct, to find out whether this could be said to be rape or not. And that is why the reference to her, behavior and how she was behaving and drinking, etc. Those issues, drinking per se, according to me, is immaterial. Nobody has a right to rape somebody just because she has drank somebody. I mean, it's a no means no, and I agree with the movie which was made. But that does not mean that the judge, while looking at the surrounding circumstances, can't look into all this for the purpose of taking an overall picture of whether
Yes,
this was
so-
a rape
so
which happened
the-
inside that closed room.
Okay. So you say that you need to talk about what happened then, moments leading to it, and after that. But drinking and whether she drinks or whether she's flirtatious by nature and open about sexual conversations or conversations that have sexual connotations, or hid about her candid relationship with another friend of hers who was present at that, all of that shouldn't have mattered. Trisha Shetty, quick response from you before we wrap this up.
Honestly, I am mortified, and I hope to any survivor watching this, they will remember what Advocate Pinky Anand said and what I say when I say we believe you. And please don't let these statements discourage you from going to courtrooms to seek justice. I have immense respect for Mr. Sanjay Hegde, but when I hear him say flights of fantasy, and when I hear him say this is how a survivor should behave, I am disturbed, honestly, by those statements. To the ASG before this, who said it matters the conduct of a survivor post and pre, and he took objection to the survivor being called a victim. But sir, but by that same yardstick, how are you so freely taking the standing to say this was a false allegation? If you don't want the survivor to be addressed as a victim anymore, what gives you the right to say this was a false allegation? I'm sorry, but you do not have the right to make such an assumption on the case, which still has gone to the high courts, because they are not happy with this current judgment, as many advocates and lawyers and feminist organizations are not. You all keep saying conduct. Where is the manual? Please, if you have the manual, please give us the manual on how a survivor should behave. Please tell us how a survivor should behave. Clearly, for you all, when I say you all, I'm making a crude generalization, but for people obsessed with this manual on how an ideal victim should behave, clearly you all will not be happy till you all don't see bruises, till you all don't see the survivor mutilated, till you all don't see a dead body. And even then, we have to account for caste and religious angles that come into play.
Yeah.
So please tell me, where is this manual for an ideal survivor
Okay.
that you all are obsessed over her conduct pre and post? I mean, seriously, it's easy for us to sit here and talk about
Well,
these things.
I would,
You have never
Trisha, say
subject to
this.
unwarranted- Let me just finish.
Yeah.
Let me just finish, Tanvi. I'm presuming
Tanvi,
you all have
that's
never
a
been
gross-
No, so let's-
unwarranted
It's a
sexual
gross
advances, and I hope you all are
misrepresentation.
not. You all should
It's
be
a
more
gross
sensitive to the case of
misrepresentation.
sexual abuse, as opposed to asking
Madam-
us how she was not behaving like an ideal
Madam,
survivor. I'm
you
sorry, sir,
represent
but you
what
don't
has
know
been
what
stated.
survivors go through. Sir, you don't know what survivors go through when they are subjected to abuse. Usually, you freeze. You don't know how to react. There is no manual that is given to women or survivors in general on how to behave as an ideal victim, so that they're taken seriously in courtrooms or in the eyes of people who refuse
Okay.
to see them for all of their humanity and only want to see
my,
the bruises.
my apologies, Trisha. I will have to come in here. I am completely out of time, Mr. Hegde. I'm sorry, I cannot come to you. With Trisha, I understand where you're coming
my
from.
position
The
has
argument
been
that has been made by some of the lawyers here is that in absence of evidence, okay, I will give you 30 seconds to clarify on that misrepresentation.
I have never said that there is an ideal survivor or an ideal manual. All that which has been attributed is more emotion, but no, it doesn't lay in fact. You can run the tape again. And and sometimes when you argue a case based more on emotion than on absolute logical fact, you do more disservice to the cause.
Okay, so I just want to say this to Trisha, asking if there is a manual. There isn't. And to each their own. There will be always people who say that you should have behaved this way, you should have behaved that way, and it's really to each to his own. But Trisha, at the risk of sounding somebody who you may say will discourage others from coming and speaking out and trying to get justice, my lessons from this verdict, correct or not, my lessons from this verdict have been that you need to make a note of everything that happens to you, including the calls you get, the messages you get, the conversations you have when you've had it, because if your memory gets it wrong, then it is going to go against you in a rape complaint. If you are feeling, and most importantly, my lesson from this 500-page order is, if you are feeling the trauma and the shock, show it. Don't hide it. If you have sought help from the legal experts, activists, before taking a decision on complainant, think about how that will be perceived and note down all the details. In fact, don't delay at all. Immediately file a rape complaint, resign, get medical tests, a test done right away. Do not wash your clothes before that. Hand over all the proof that is available. Trauma cannot be an excuse. These are my personal lessons from this. Now, granted, there is an argument to be made that in the absence of any other credible evidence, all that we had to do was base it on what the complainant was saying. And in this case, her word wasn't proven to be enough. The rest, I leave it to you to decide. Thank you so much for joining us on this conversation.